So, don't make vegans look bad. Don't make vegans look bad. It's a simple, obvious, uncontroversial assumption. It's an assumption in our movement, and I think that it's wrong. And I want to talk about assumptions in our movement. Operating principles that seem so obvious, they go unquestioned. Now you know I was one of the Shack 7. Well into prison, I was really wedded to Shack-style campaigning. I continued to believe it was the most strategic and effective way to make change. And my first stirrings of doubt about that made me very uncomfortable. It was a forced reevaluation of tactics and strategy that I had taken as gospel, as self-evidently effective. It was a difficult but important reckoning, and I think our movement overall needs something similar, to question the beliefs that seem most obviously true. And if you come away from my talk today with more questions than answers, then I have succeeded, because I think that should be our movement's MO. So what I'm going to talk about is drawn from my article in Satya. I hope that you get an opportunity to read it, as well as the other wonderful essays that are in there. So the first assumption I'm going to talk about is don't make vegans look bad. This seems obviously true. When we look bad, people don't want to be like us, they don't want to go vegan. The assumption underlying that is that we can cut out the looking bad without losing necessary components of social change. I think we need to recognize that whether we look good or bad is determined by social norms. And those are really useful guides when what we want to do is conform to those norms. But they are really crummy guides when what we want to do is change those norms. I want to argue that we should look bad. When we soften our message, tamp down our protests, speak up less strongly for animals in order to look bad, we sacrifice our efficacy. Take, for example, a protest near a meat case in a restaurant. Many think this is harmful to the movement because it makes animal rights activists look bad. But why? There's nothing inherently illogical or nonsensical about this. We oppose violence against animals. We oppose eating animals. When we protest in these spaces, we are protesting near products of violence against animals. We are protesting against eating animals. Why doesn't it make sense to protest directly next to the thing that we are trying to stop? So the issue is that not that this is nonsensical. Rather, it goes against dominant narratives that obscure the inherent logic of this kind of action. They look strange because they violate social norms. Norms that say animals are food, norms that say whether we should eat them is a private, personal choice, and most problematically, norms that say animal rights is not sufficiently important for us to stand up in those spaces and demand that people pay attention and stop. These kinds of norms are what prompt dismissals like there is a time and a place for protest. This is what we engage in when we say it is inappropriate or ridiculous to protest directly next to the thing that we oppose. On the contrary, I think it is ridiculous to say that we should not protest directly next to the thing that we oppose. And I think we can all think of historical examples where the early challengers to oppressive social norms were mocked and ridiculed. So without reducing or equating complex oppressions or movements, without claiming that the struggles are over, I think we can remember that the Stonewall rioters were ridiculed. I think we can remember that early civil rights sit-ins, people who were doing early civil rights sit-ins were told that they looked bad, that this was not effective, that they shouldn't do this, that they made the movement look bad, and that the idea of women gaining the vote was originally deemed laughable. I think, on the contrary, we should do more of the things that make us look bad. I think that the only way out of looking bad is through it. If these actions don't make sense, our job is not to stop doing them. It is to make them make sense. The way to successfully challenge social norms is to normalize the challenge to them. We should, thank you. I did think that was pretty quotable. We should be the change we want to see in the world, not primarily in a way in which we're living our own values in our personal lives, but about creating the world that we want by doing it. And I want to make a note on normalization for a second. Bear with me here. I'm really going to drive my point home. Right. Can you hear me? Yeah, you can clap for that. That's already clappable. So when I got out of prison, everyone was wearing skinny jeans and ballet flats, and I thought to myself, when did the 1980s come back? That looks ridiculous. I will never wear it. Now, I'm not quite saying that our moral beliefs are as shallow as our fashion choices, but I am emphasizing that we pick up our values, we pick up what we think looks normal and right from our community. And if we want people to be outraged about what's happening to animals, we should act that way ourselves. And eventually, now, not all looking bad is created equal. If we look bad because we violate social norms that are good, for example, if our animal rights activism is sexist, then looking bad is not helpful. Not that I'm saying sexism is over, but nobody will say it's good. In this example, looking bad isn't ineffective because looking bad is inherently bad. It's bad because sexism is bad. I also don't think it's helpful to look bad because the focus is on our bad tactics. And in this, I would actually include a lot of the Shack campaign, where the discussion was about smoke bombs and not about animal rights. I think we want to look bad in a very particular way. We want to look bad because we are speaking up strongly for animals. We want to look bad because people are telling us to relax, this is not important, and we are responding by saying that it is. If we are told that what we are doing is inconvenient, impolite, inappropriate, laughable, ridiculous, because this issue is not important, because it is not an emergency, that is the kind of looking bad we should not shy away from. We want to look bad in a way that wouldn't look bad for some other issue. We want to look bad in a way that wouldn't look bad if those meat cases were full of dogs and cats. To be clear, I don't disagree that animal rights activists look bad when they protest in grocery stores or when they protest in restaurants. I disagree that looking bad means we should stop. We need more of it, not less. The second assumption that I want to question is inherent in Don't Make Vegans Look Bad. And that is that the way to make change, the way to create a vegan society, is to change individuals one by one. Our standard operating procedure is that we make vegans or reduce the amount of meat that people eat, they stop eating animals, or they reduce how many animal products they buy, we put animal agriculture out of business, or at least we reduce the number of animals who are killed. I think there are many things to critique in this standard operating procedure. The one that I'm going to focus on is the assumption that the fastest way to change society is to focus on individual behavior. Because I agree. If I saw people marching into a restaurant where I was eating and yelling about something that I didn't believe in, their protest wouldn't change my mind. And if the goal is to change the person directly in front of you, then yelling and chanting and being obstinate is not going to do it. But that is not the purpose of these protests. The purpose of the protest is not to act on individuals, but to act on society directly. And I'm going to use an example to illustrate this of Occupy Wall Street. On the one hand, we can argue that Occupy failed. The occupations dissolved, inequality persists, and we have seen few concrete policy changes. On the other hand, there's a way to understand Occupy Wall Street as enormously successful. It forced inequality and corporate greed onto the table and into the public discourse in a way that it had not been in a long time. We have seen efforts at concrete policy changes that followed or were strengthened by Occupy Wall Street, such as the fight for 15 to raise the minimum wage. It motivated people to act, swelled the numbers of people who were acting, and compelled political bodies to concede to these demands. We have seen debate at the highest levels of political office, a presidential campaign in which inequality is a major issue. Bernie Sanders' candidacy is the big deal it is because of Occupy. I think Occupy was successful in these ways. And I think the critiques of Occupy's ostensible failure or admitted shortcomings merely focus on the ways in which it was not sufficient, which is fine. But the things that Occupy achieved were absolutely necessary. And if we could achieve that for animal rights, that would be a huge step forward. My main point of using Occupy as an example is that Occupy changed the world immediately. Occupy changed the world immediately. Overnight, we went from a society in which Occupy had not happened into one in which it had. Suddenly, we lived in a society where masses of people had acted provocatively, disruptively, and with firm moral conviction to oppose economic inequality. And what did this do? It prompted discussion, massive public debate about inequality, articles, op-eds, news coverage, academic papers. It yielded mobilization. People came out to occupy in their own cities. They joined occupations. Suddenly, there was a place to go in which to act out your opposition to economic inequality. It caused polarization. With the renewed debate, people took sides. It prompted concrete campaigns, as I've already mentioned, such as the Fight for 15 and Bernie Sanders' campaign, that carried forward the issue to actually enact change in policy. And it prompted both condemnation and praise of what the occupiers were doing. Importantly, ultimately, that condemnation did not discredit the issue. That's what a debate is. Some people will condemn you. We need all of these things in animal rights. We need more and deeper public debate about the fundamental issue. Even condemnation of what we're doing is helpful. Every time we compel someone to say that animal rights is not important, that is an opportunity for us to say that it is. We need mobilization. And we need people to take sides. Right now, you don't need to have a position on animal rights. Compare that to an issue like marriage equality. Do you know anybody who doesn't have a position on that? We need to force people to take sides. I think the title of this talk is very fitting. The Power of Social Change. I want to emphasize the power of acting directly on society, putting activity out into the world, rather than trying to change individuals in an unchanged world. When our movement thinks about social change, we think about individuals. We ask, what is the best argument to change behavior? Is it health? Is it ethics? Is it environmental concerns? Should we fixate on vegan purity? The question is, what will cause someone to change themselves in an unchanged world? It's thinking of individual change as a vehicle to collective change. I am not so interested in those questions. The question I want to ask and answer is, what kind of world does someone need to live in order for them to pay attention to and form an opinion about and change their behavior regarding animals? And then I don't know what this sentence means. I don't know what the sentence means. Anyway, I'll read the next sentence. So then I want to figure out what kind of world that is, and then I want to put the things that need to be in that world out into the world. And I have to imagine it involves people standing up strongly for animals. I'm not interested in what people thought about inequality before Occupy. I'm similarly not interested in what causes someone in this society, as it stands now, to decide to be a vegan. I'm not interested in pushing them to change their behavior based on a decontextualized argument. I want to create a debate for them to pick from. I want to create social factions for them to align themselves with. I'm interested in opinions before and after provocative public action. I'm interested in opinions on inequality before and after Occupy. And I'm interested in opinions on animal rights before and after our movement gets it together to engage in massive, widespread, provocative public activity for animals. I'm talking open rescue, mass sit-ins, disruptions of prominent public events, when we create a massive public debate and there are sides to choose from. To do that, we need to understand our audience. Our audience is not the people in the grocery store or the restaurant whose shopping and dining we are disrupting. It is not the public, an undifferentiated mass of people with a single reaction to our protests. We think our job is to directly make vegans. I think our job is to make activists who will join us in putting provocative public activity out into the world that dramatizes animal rights. Potential activists, other vegans, people we can get to join us to eventually take massive action, and people who will comment on our activities, journalists, columnists, bloggers, opinion leaders, as they say in communications, which is my profession, whose attention we can get, who will write articles and opinion pieces about the issue we are dramatizing. To close, I want to urge you to be skeptical of beliefs that seem obviously true. When you like an answer about how to make change, because it assures you that you don't need to do something that makes you uncomfortable, question it. Because that kind of discomfort is inherent and unavoidable in challenging dominant beliefs. And challenging dominant beliefs is absolutely necessary to changing the world for animals. Thank you.